Surrealism is defined as an art style with the qualities of a bizarre and unnatural look and feel to them. Something that taps into the unconscious mind to release creativity. If I had to pick any game that looks surrealist, intentional or not, it has to be Super Mario 64. This game feels as though you've cracked open the mind of a child who was obsessed with Mario and then decided to go along for the ride. Despite the game's rudimentary 3D models and low-resolution graphics, accompanying Mario on this journey is, at least for me, an amazing experience each and every single time I embark on it. This is definitely due to my own personal bias. The game practically raised me. I love this game for a multitude of reasons, but it can definitely be boiled down to one root cause, and that's nostalgia. And whether you like it or not, nostalgia isn't really what makes a game fundamentally, objectively good. A lot of that falls on how the game handles itself when it comes to, for instance, the platforming gameplay or controls. But today I'm not going to be attempting to explain away how, despite the camera, controlling Mario is actually pretty impressive for his first 3D outing. I'm not going to be dissecting the programming of it and testing its limits or exploring anything out of bounds. We have guys for that already. Today I'm going to be diving into the atmosphere of the game, the soul of it if you will, and hopefully I can do it some justice. So without further ado, let's begin. It's not a stretch to say that first impressions are everything when it comes to video games as a kid. If the box art isn't cool or the sound and feel isn't great, there's little chance that a kid will actually end up playing through the entire game. Say what you will about the game mechanics, but the reality is to most kids, the only thing that matters is how fun the game feels, not how smooth the game plays. Mario 64 does an amazing job at this in the first few levels, and it does a great job at maintaining this sense of wonder throughout the game. The way the game opens is at juxtaposition with just about everything else about it. You start off peaceful, in serenity. The sound of your feet running and the birds chirping delivering a warm feeling as you explore the area around you. The feeling of freedom paired with an overarching eventuality of linear motive as you have no choice but to eventually explore what's beyond the castle doors. And as you enter, you're greeted with a very strange and seemingly out of place noise alongside a beastly laugh. And after that, the music kicks in and begins to paint the world, for lack of a better term. The first course you play in the game is Bob-omb Battlefield, and the moment you come tumbling into the frame, the music begins to barrage you with an unforgettable score. Once more, you get to explore this tiny world and its odd inhabitants, all the while the layout of the level itself is just as the outdoors to the castle were. Exploration with underlying linearism. Once you obtain your first star by defeating an easy boss, you unlock more worlds that will allow you to experience more of what this game has to offer. A secret slide, a fortress in the sky, and one of my personal favorites, Cool Cool Mountain. Each of these levels combined is roughly 19 stars in total, not counting the secret ones, and it feels amazing. Going back to replay each of these levels is a blast on so many levels, ones that I couldn't have even expected. That was until I went back to Jolly Roger Bay, but I'll touch on that later. After obtaining 1 star, you finally obtain the chance to do a more challenging course, Whomp's Fortress. This one doesn't have much to it other than some basic to intermediate platforming, and it's clear that this level was designed for this purpose. Learning to do wall kicks, higher jumps, using spatial awareness, and finding your enemy's not-so-secret weakness are all a part of this level. And it sports the exact same song as the opening level, thus creating a more inviting atmosphere to come and try these new things. Obtaining a couple stars here unlocks more levels, one of those being Cool Cool Mountain. Cool Cool Mountain starts off with the player flying down an icy slide to the bottom and getting a star for it. Revisiting this level allows you to be fully immersed in what's going on, whether it's saving the penguin, finding the 8 red coins, attempting to pitifully prove that wall kicks will work, or simply helping a snowman retrieve his body. No matter what the task is, you end up becoming immersed with the tasks you're given, while the music plays a repetitive tune in the background. Of course, what I just said goes for all levels, but I personally believe that Cool Cool Mountain does it best. While the music is repetitive, it wasn't noticeably so. Again, most of these tracks do end up getting old after a while, but for me at least, when discussing the atmosphere, I believe that the music perfectly accompanies everything you do in this level. Repetitive nature is the downfall of a lot of newer games, as a lot of the time they're continually doing a repetitive action that will eventually break a player into feeling like they're doing more chores than actual gameplay. The issue with that is even in today's climate, it's genuinely difficult to make anything feel like more than a fetch quest, and that adds into the replayability factor of certain games as well. So you have to imagine for an early 3D platformer, it would be at least somewhat repetitive, but it's shocking to see the replayability factor with this game, whether it's through the speedrunning community or the Let's Play community. And a lot of that has to do with factors outside of the normal rhetoric when discussing these games. And despite the fact that it originated as a meme, the phrase "every copy of Super Mario 64 is personalized" couldn't be more true. From an atmospheric standpoint, the way you choose to play the game, the order in which you completed each level, your favorite game mechanic or song, your favorite NPC, your favorite painting, or your favorite room within the castle walls, well, that's all personally tailored to you. It's something you as the player latched onto. It's something that brought a smile to your face or made you exclaim, "Holy shit, I actually liked that." It's the reason I go back to play the game myself when I'm having panic attacks, and I apologize if that's too much information. The fact is, the atmosphere of the game is engineered in such a way, intentionally or unintentionally, for you to wander back into the child's playroom of your imagination every single time you hear the startup noise followed by
It's me, Mario!
And that plays into the nostalgia of the game as well. That's why it feels personalized. However, going back and playing this game now is different. It still produces the same effect, but when the initial burst of nostalgia subsides, what are we left with? Going back and playing this game produced an empty feeling. Whereas before it was amazing to hop back into everything and have nostalgia meet me, once I started getting into the real meat of the game, I realized how lonely everything felt. And yes, part of that is due to the lack of interactable NPCs, I know. The game itself is already set up to be a solo endeavor, as the whole premise of it is that the castle had the lifeblood out of it due to the fact that Bowser had quite literally trapped everyone inside the castle walls. As you run around the castle to the memorable music and realize how little you can interact with anyone save for a few stationary toads, Mips the rabbit, and some readable signs, the patter of Mario's steps seem to echo more and more into the distant and cold nature of the setting. You are completely alone, left to explore these worlds completely on your own. This is why I believe the Luigi rumors became so popular when the game was released, and why everyone read into the L is Real 2401 plaque way too much. No one wants to be alone, they wanted to have something to latch onto, whether it's a friendly face or another playable character. But it goes beyond the ordinary "there's no NPCs" argument that I've become accustomed to when I ask about this particular feeling. Mario 64 itself is a time capsule to an era when 3D games weren't, well, gigantic and sparse worlds in the scope of the open world style games we have today. The scope of Mario 64 for the time, being able to hop to multiple different worlds and all, is a groundbreaking accomplishment for the time. Yet after sinking so much time into the newer games, going back to play Mario 64 has a definite feeling of emptiness to it. I attribute this to the level design of each level. If you get to a point where you can gaze out over the level, like the mountain in Bob-omb Battlefield or the high platform in Wet Dry World, even the edge of Lethal Lava Land, you can gaze out past the invisible walls that contain these worlds. And out of bounds you see nothing. An empty void that stretches on forever to contain a sole level. And some part of that, for me at least, strikes me as extremely lonely. Each of these worlds are self-contained, and at first it feels as though you're hopping from destination to destination trying to obtain as many stars as you can, and that's certainly the point of the game. But being able to step back and observe it is also equally compelling in the low-resolution blank page that it creates. It's surreal to me that these worlds are tiny islands floating in suspension in the middle of an abyss. And then there's the music. As I mentioned previously, it's repetitive as hell. But when you're a kid and you're playing through the game, it's one of the last things you pay attention to. However, soundtracks when referring to virtual atmospheres are one of the most important components of building the area around you. And some soundtracks, intentionally or not, invoke nostalgia. That's why heading to Jolly Roger Bay was such a slap in the face for me when I finally landed on the beach surrounded by the blue slopes of the map. Hearing the echoey, distant keys slowly peak to their crescendo as I played throughout the level was both heartwarming and saddening. To me, hearing the song as I played the game began to remind me of all the late nights I spent with my brothers and sister just playing the game. It reminded me of when I first even got the game from my mom when I was 6 years old and in the hospital. I truly believe that where the nostalgia in this game lies is in its soundtrack and definitely in its sound effects. But what makes me so sad about it is it encapsulates the time you spent with it entirely. And I know this can be true of all games and their soundtracks depending on which game you spent the most time with, but it feels as though Mario 64 was manufactured to be nostalgic. To me, it's sad to think that these worlds hang in an infinite abyss waiting for you to rejoin them and re-experience everything you got to experience in your childhood. And perhaps I'm being too cheesy, it is just a game after all. But the feeling of loneliness from a game that gave you solace when you were younger and you didn't understand anything about game design or game illusions is so off-putting. Knowing that the game is very limited in what it can do when you replay it and comparing it to games you've played since you last turned it off takes away the wonder of it. You can no longer be occupied by throwing a couple figures around or collecting stars through various means in various different courses using various different hints. In fact, it can almost feel like the only thing that propels you through the game isn't the game itself anymore, but rather the memories you have with the game itself. And once more, whether it was intentional or not, the atmosphere invites this sense of longing by teasing the idea that these worlds are just tucked away in the walls of a castle that floats indefinitely. There's simply no denying that this game is different from the other entries in the Mario series. And the differences don't just stop at the lost feeling, either. When you look at other games in the franchise, the Mario series is often lighthearted, fun, and buoyant in both its color and sound design. Even entries like Luigi's Mansion keep it generally lighthearted for the most part, and that's a spin-off series that's meant to be a little ghoulish. But when you look at Mario 64, it's a little hard to tell what atmosphere the developers were aiming for. Clearly there's the layer of fun and manufactured nostalgia I've been yapping about this whole time, but there's also a layer of downright creepiness to it. And no, I'm not just talking about Big Boo's haunt, but since it's the most notable of them all, we'll start there. As a kid, seeing the Boo in the hallway to the castle courtyard alone was enough to give me the creeps, and going into the castle courtyard with them all over the place was strange too. Once you unlock this level, it's unlike any other course entrance there is. Mario hops up and shrinks down into the cage and you get the star select. Once you arrive, one of the creepiest soundtracks ever made in a game, period, begins to play. If you observe your surroundings as I did in the other levels, you'll see that the borders of the map are caged in with nothing but a dark forest staring back at you. The only choice you have now is to enter the mansion. The game has now stripped you of your freedom. It also doesn't help that sometimes you'll hear a laugh completely off-brand with the rest of the laughs you'll hear throughout the level.
Whoa, what the fuck? Yo, what? Did anyone just hear that?
Exploring this mansion is, at best, unsettling even to this day. The various different rooms, the books that fly off the walls, the chairs, ghosts, disembodied eyes, a merry-go-round which I actually like despite it coming off as lonely and eerie when I walk away from it, and, well, obviously the piano, but everyone and their mom cites that when talking about this game, so I'm gonna skip over that. Big Boo's haunt is far from what this game has to offer when it comes to creepy content, too. The castle in of itself is a little creepy for a kid when you hear that most of the inhabitants are trapped inside the castle walls, literally. And let's talk about the castle's basement, leaking and dark, only lit up by torches and a toad solemnly standing in the corner, not to mention turning the corner and being greeted with this. It's the low-res feel of it that makes it feel all the more spookier. Hazy Maze Cave is creepy in its own special way as well, the most significant thing being Dory. There's something about him that's a little too real, and for comparison, this is what the same character looks like in later games. At least other characters look somewhat the same. Even the DS version got rid of this. Reading the sign about not becoming his lunch almost feels like it should be reserved for the eel in Jolly Roger Bay. But by far one of the creepiest things from this game for me has to be the endless staircase. Running in a constant loop to an endless tune that continuously repeats is extremely creepy, but I suppose that's the entire point of it. And of course there's more that I could cover, like the eeriness of knowing that the wet dry world skybox is an actual city, and how weird it is to almost feel like the people in these houses are watching you. Or how it sinks in that even when you leave the castle, there's really no evidence of any kind of civilization around you at all. Just completely cut off from the rest of everything. Now, in a technical sense, it makes sense. You can't develop a whole town or city, and quite honestly, I'm sure I'm making things a bit too deep. However, I can't help but feel like this game unintentionally invites and provides for a lot of these interpretations, and it is quite fun to draw them up and talk about them. But there is one thing that never changes about this game, even when you compare it to the newer, more bubbly, child-friendly games in the franchise, and that's the charm of it. And it's not just the fact that nostalgia is so deeply embedded in the roots of the game. It's also the fact that nostalgia alone, as I said before at the beginning of this video, can't make a game good, but somehow this game generates nostalgia. Yes, I'm obsessed with this game and biased because, well, I grew up with it. But in spite of all that, I truly believe it's one of the best games of all time and certainly a staple and blueprint for how 3D platformers should look. It also has an amazing dreamlike quality to it that I don't think any game I've played since ever got to reinterpret, reimagine, or remake. The spirit of this game is locked to a cartridge, and in its own right, it definitely is personalized, it's definitely surreal, and it's definitely 100% one of my favorite games of all time.